If you were asked to describe a jazz musician, what would you say? Dark sunglasses? Saxophone or trumpet in hand? What about lipstick? A glittery dress? The two latter characteristics may not come to mind because jazz is commonly understood to be a primarily male music. Historically, women were seen to play a less important role in its evolution than their male counterparts. But this judgment is misplaced. Despite the obstacles, many females have emerged and thrived in jazz. Two artists who have done so are Mary Lou Williams and Esperanza Spalding. While Williams was challenged with charting a new course for women in jazz, and Spalding is challenged to make it accessible to young people today, both ladies have strengthened and reinforced the art overall. A little background on jazz history and women. Before socially accepted, music was seen as an imprudent career option, meant to be restricted to the home. In this context, females were actually more involved with music than were men. But when music gained social repute at the turn of the century, men flooded the scene, catapulting women from their former positions. In the case of jazz, men tried to restrict female involvement because they felt that jazz was a space for male fellowship and creativity. Also, jazz's aggressive playing styles and the rugged lifestyle of performing in clubs until early morning were seen to be inappropriate for women. These widely shared beliefs made it difficult for female jazz musicians to break into the culture. The idea that women in bands were more of a gimmick rather than serious musicians is shown in vibraphonist Marjorie Hines' quote, "In a sense, you weren't really looked upon as a musician. They just wanted you to look attractive, ultra-feminine, largely because you were doing something they didn't consider feminine." Guitarist Carlene Ray also reinforces this idea in talking about how people react to her performances. They quote, "Don't think it's possible for a woman to sound as good as men." In this context, it has been challenging for women to overcome the idea that they have a limited role in jazz. Despite these limitations on female musical expression in jazz, some incredible artists have emerged, one of whom was Mary Lou Williams. Known as the First Lady of Jazz, Williams blazed the trail both in creating incredible compositions for bands throughout her career and in publicizing female musicians' ability to play more aggressive styles. Mary Lou Williams was born in Atlanta, Georgia in 1910. At age 4, her family moved to Pittsburgh, and it was around this time when she started playing piano. By the time Williams was in middle school, her natural talent was so well known that she had become a familiar name throughout the Midwestern region. To help out her family, who were going through tough economic times, she started working as a pianist at age 14 in 1924. And at age 15, she started touring with the band behind comedian Buzz Harris, performing in such venues as circuses and carnivals. It was in this band where she met her soon-to-be husband, tenor saxophonist John Williams. She and Williams married when she was 17 in 1927 and left the band to move to Memphis. After staying there briefly, the couple moved to Oklahoma City, where they met up with Andy Kirk's 12 Clouds of Joy, the band that provided Williams the opportunity to break onto the national stage. Williams started with the 12 Clouds mainly as support staff, often acting as band driver for the musicians and their instruments. Yet, Andy Kirk would always turn to her to play a tune to get the party going if the night seemed dead. Williams said, quote, "They would send somebody to get me, and I'd go in and play Froggy Bottom or some other boogie-woogie number, and things would jump."
The best way to learn how to play jazz is through a playing musician. So my education came through the Andy Kirk band I was with for 10 years. You know, they taught me everything that I know, how to arrange and everything.
Pretty soon in 1928, people began pursuing Williams to make arrangements for their band, and by 1931 she became the Cloud's chief composer. As she became more and more known, Williams began receiving requests for 5 to 6 arrangements per week. Despite her successes and increasing popularity in the 1930s and early 40s, Williams began to feel creatively locked in by the mainstream musical expectations, which she felt were being forced upon her. Under this pressure, she left the Clouds in 1942, divorced her husband John Williams, and moved back home to Philadelphia. There she married trumpeter Harold Shorty Baker and joined Duke Ellington's band in 1943. While in New York, Williams tapped into the bebop scene and started interacting with bop musicians, including Dizzy Gillespie and Thelonious Monk. Finding a new way to express her creativity, Williams produced bop-style compositions, including her Zodiac Suite album. Although experimenting in the new bop form, Williams still felt she was being restricted to her old-time swing style. After decided to take a break from music in 1954. In her time away from music, Williams began converting to Roman Catholicism, as was shown through the piece Mary Lou's Mass and albums such as Black Christ of the Andes. Continuing to make music until she died in 1981, Williams started the female tradition off strong with her incredible talents and creativity. Reinventing her musical styles multiple times throughout her career, the First Lady of Jazz has shown the many forms through which jazz could be portrayed, and the ability of females to perform excellently in each form. Her contributions have helped shape jazz's image and continues to inspire musicians today, as is shown through the Kennedy Center's Women in Jazz Festival put on in her honor. Williams is a prime example of how female musicians have had and will continue to have a profound impact on jazz. One of today's young musicians has also made an impact on jazz. Combining virtuosic bass playing skills with light and soulful vocals, Esperanza Spalding, the 27-year-old jazz musician from Portland, Oregon, has demonstrated incredible creativity and unbelievable musical talent in her career. Spalding was born in Portland in 1984 and grew up in a single-parent household with her mother. At age 4, she discovered her interest in music after watching Yo-Yo Ma perform on the television show Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. By age 5, she had taught herself how to play the violin and joined the Chamber Music Society of Oregon, of which she was a member for the following 10 years. While in high school, Spalding discovered her love for the bass and began to transition away from classical music to hip-hop and jazz. She also continued to expand her musical horizons under the guardianship of musicians in Portland's musical community, who encouraged her to continue learning. She decided to leave high school, get her GED, and enroll in the music program at Portland State University. After spending just a year in the program, she transferred to the Berklee School of Music and earned her bachelor's in music in 3 years. After graduating, she was invited back to Berklee to teach, becoming one of the youngest faculty members in the school's history. Although receiving a teaching position at the age of 20 is certainly an achievement in itself, Spalding's work since then has continued to add to her impressive resume. She has worked with several jazz musicians, including Joe Lovano and Wayne Shorter, and has released 4 solo albums to date: Junjo in 2006, Esperanza in 2008, Chamber Music Society in 2010, and most recently, Radio Music Society in 2012. Here's a clip of Spalding performing the song Smile Like That from her latest album.
It's something I can't help but notice, the way your eyes focus on each word and just your shadow that makes you smile like that, smile like that now. I like that your heart is open and you love freely and all, but not like that. I want us to be two lovely people, and we feel like 3.
Aside from her integration of different influences and expressive performing style, Spalding makes one of her greatest contributions to jazz by making it more accessible to a generation to which jazz is no longer mainstream. Using her fame from being the first jazz musician to win the Grammy Award for Best New Artist in 2011, Spalding has also used her new visibility to pay her respect to jazz greats whom she admires. Spalding is working to broaden the horizons of the modern young listener, as she did when creating her album, Chamber Music Society.
I'm really proud of this record. I feel like it's a really complete piece of work. I'm really proud of the collaborators. I'm proud of all the musicians. I'm just proud of it. It's my baby. The concept of it is exploring a space where chamber jazz and chamber classical music intersect. And I think it's captivating. You don't have to be a jazz or a classical head to get into it.
Spalding uses innovative ways to incorporate jazz elements into the music of young people by infusing familiar messages to her audience in her music, as shown in her song, Radio Song.
The benefit of being with a radio is something totally beyond your realm of knowledge can surprise you. And part of the premise of that stems from my concern about the accessibility of jazz. If you don't already know about jazz music or you're not already a fan, how would you get an opportunity to find out if it spoke to you? If you get exposed to it enough, you might find a taste for it.
Spalding not only adds something new to the jazz scene, but also is acting as a stepping stone for young listeners to appreciate the music of her jazz heroes. She says, quote, "All my personal heroes who are revered in the jazz world, like Joe Lovano and Terry Lynn Carrington, should be heard by a mainstream audience because what they manifest in their music is so beautiful, sincere, and uplifting. While her impressive skill is certainly a direct contribution to jazz itself, her intent to widen the scope of new audiences makes Esperanza Spalding's presence in the jazz timeline very valuable indeed." A reflection of the contributions of other female jazz artists throughout history, both Mary Lou Williams and Esperanza Spalding demonstrate that women are an integral part of the jazz tradition. Their lives and careers reinforce the idea that a lipstick tube has just as much place on the bandstand as a pair of dark sunglasses.